la famille.
So, I won't introduce you the first speaker. I can just tell you that she is amazing. And you will discover why. She is a real UX designer. And let me tell you a little story. So, when we invite guest speakers from all over the world, we want to make it good, to make them feel at home, to provide them a real good experience, right? So she flew from New York to Paris. She came to the family house, which is not the office space, it's a proper house where we welcome the guest. And unfortunately, at 2 a.m. in the morning, she got locked down in the bathroom, and no one was there. Usually there is a ton of people, but no one was there that night. It was last night. From 2 a.m. in the morning until 9 a.m. She didn't took her phone. She didn't, but at the family we have a cat, and that night he was there, and he wanted to follow her in the toilet. So he spent the whole night with her. And what is cool with UX designer is that she can turn anything from her life into a story. That's what a UX designer is. So if you go on her Twitter, Sarah Doody, you will see the story of her in the toilet, because finally the chief happiness officer of the family in the morning came, and he knew that she was locked in the toilet. He gave her some cookies and her phone, and so she could do that while she was in the toilet. So here I am with the cat, and yeah, my bad. This house, yeah, and you can see the full story. 4 people are working to get me out. How does this happen to me? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And this is my cat. So, this is just a little thing to tell you that UX design is not about a pixel in a browser. It's more about how to tell a good story, even if it's to your users. And she will go through it with you, and I hope you're gonna learn a lot and like it. Give her a lot of love, because her night has not been so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite the adventure here. I just want to turn the notes off of the keynote.
Use your computer.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I show up in Paris to the apartment, and no one's there. I wasn't really sure what was going on, and then 1:30 in the morning, the cat follows me into the restroom, and the big question people keep tweeting me is, why do you take a cat to the bathroom with you? And I didn't do that. It ran in at the last second, and I don't know, somehow the door got completely jammed, and it was a really, really small bathroom, like an airplane bathroom, and it wasn't even big enough to lay down. So there's the bathroom, and there wasn't really anything to work with. I thought maybe I can use a coat hanger. I even tried with this nice bracelet to try and go like this and shove it through the door and make it open the door. It didn't work. I tried using this. That was useless. So we spent the night in the toilet together, and it was quite an adventure. You already saw some of the highlights here, but that was my time in Paris. So I'm excited to be here. It's my first time to Berlin. Hopefully this doesn't happen again. I've already gone to the apartment so far, so no problems yet. Anyway, if you want more details or have any other questions, it was very hot. Got very hot. I didn't know what time it was because I was not wearing a watch. But I kind of calculated, because I was hosting office hours at 2 in the afternoon at Paris, the family. And I thought, okay, here's what will happen. I will miss the office hours. Eventually someone will notice, and then help will maybe arrive around 4. So I thought to myself, I've probably got a good 14 hours here in this bathroom with the cat. But thankfully, the cleaning lady came, who I don't think normally comes on a Tuesday. I'm not sure. But anyway, thank goodness she arrived. So now I go back to Paris on Friday, and I'll always have my phone with me. So it's just one of those things. But we're not here to talk about the cat. Let's talk about prototyping and user experience. So a little bit about me. I have been doing user experience for the past 14 years, and I'm from Canada, but I've been living in New York City for the past 10 years. And for the past 5 years, I've been running my own UX consultancy. So I work with startups to help them launch that first version of their product, or if they're already in market, finally look at their analytics and make data-driven decisions and optimize that experience. So some of our icons aren't showing up, but no problem. So I also have a ton of downloads, templates, resources for you, and the slides as well. So this link is at the end as well, but instead of just sending you a Dropbox link, this puts it into a really great kind of portal, which you can go back to. So this will be at the end, but there's a lot of great material in there. But once you get in, because I'm a user experience designer, I don't like just sending the Dropbox or a zip file or something, so it's all very structured, and I try to use cool family emojis. But let's get right to it. Okay, so we're going to break this up into two parts here. First, why should you prototype? So one of my good girlfriends, when we were in our 20s, she always said, we just have to fake it until we make it. Fake it about work, fake it about hobbies, anything. This was her motto, and our little friend group all adopted this concept, I guess. And it's really worked out for her quite well, because now she has a multi-million-dollar family business doing air conditioning and heating of all things. But she has really no experience in this. She just kind of faked it and created this business with her family. So it's worked out really well for her. For me, I used to be a total perfectionist. So I would not fake it. I would perfect it and then launch it, which meant I never launched anything, as maybe some of you have experienced. But recently I really tried to adopt this idea of faking it, and that's meant a lot of prototyping, whether it's been a notebook I created or an online course or a YouTube channel I just started prototyping in January. It's been amazing to see the impact of adopting this mindset of faking it or prototyping, which we're going to dive into. But the problem is that a lot of teams end up just making it. So how many of you are in a company where you can honestly say you actually prototype things versus just going ahead and starting to build and getting into the code and getting stuck in the weeds? Who prototypes? Oh, good, a couple of people. But the rest of you, do you feel like you're caught in the weeds all the time, and you maybe have an idea, and then a week in, you're still debating the database structure or a user flow or something like that? Who's experienced that before? Yeah. So a lot of teams just end up getting into that habit of just making it. And the problem is that it's really tempting to just start making for, I think, a lot of reasons. I've worked with a lot of companies, and I've started to understand why they dive into this making it phase. And it results in outcomes, right? It gives you something to sell. Maybe your sales team wants something working so they can go sell it. It helps you attract investors if you have working code or something to show versus something static. Helps you recruit new talent. Be the first to market, so you can add that gold star to your about page or something. Or just that feeling of progress, because it's one thing to prototype and have something that's a little static, but I think teams get excited when there's something that's actually working. So this is what I think really motivates us to get into this habit of jumping ahead and making it before we actually fake it or prototype. But my big advice is don't get trapped in this habit of making, because it leads to this totally false sense of progress. And here's what I mean by that. So if you look at the product development process, typically we have some ideation phase where we're coming up with the idea, hopefully researching it or validating it, which most people skip over, and then you jump into this make it phase. But that make it phase, or that phase when you're building, it gets really expensive, time consuming. You're taking on a lot of risk because you haven't validated your idea. And those things have a pretty huge amount of consequence, because if you have to go back and change things, that's going to take your team so much time and money, and it just ends up being counterproductive, really. So the whole point is that if you make it too soon, if you start building the details and the weeds too soon, you're going to have to fake it later. And when I think of other companies that have probably built too fast, a lot of them come to mind, but I think these are 3 really good examples. So who remembers Google Wave from maybe 2008 or 7? They were launched as this email killer and this new way to communicate. It was going to revolutionize everything. And then there was all this fanfare. They were in TechCrunch and all the publications. And they launched, and the issue was, it was full of features. No one understood how to use it. And there was no real clear use case of why you would use Google Wave. And so I don't know anyone that worked on Google Wave, but my best guess, and looking at how Google does a lot of product development, is that they probably had this idea. Maybe it was people on their 10% time or whatever they call it. And they had this idea, and they just started building, and they never validated that idea. So needless to say, Google Wave never took off, and it's in the Crunchbase Deadpool now, right? Not to hit on Google too much, but Glass is another example, I think. Great idea, but not totally a clear use case for the mass market. And they went down the path of creating this product, which is great, but now is it widely adopted yet? No. So I think with a little research and prototyping, they probably could have realized that people don't like to wear the glasses, or maybe are self-conscious, or there's a little bit of intimidation with the glass. So if you think about your team, I wanted to put together some symptoms that might indicate that maybe your team or your company is going down that path of building your product too fast and skipping the prototyping phase. So I think you can kind of start to see the symptoms in 3 different areas. If you think of your product, if your product is experiencing a lot of scope creep, and you started with 3 features, and next thing you know you have 13 features or something, it's probably a sign you built too fast and you didn't prototype to really commit to the core features that actually matter. Obviously that impacts your timeline, your budget, but the one I really want to point out is this idea of scope reduction, where that happens when you have this idea, then you start adding features, and then you realize we're never going to launch. So what happens is you end up reducing so many features that your product just doesn't make sense anymore. So I think if you're experiencing that, it's probably a sign that you've built too fast as well. For your team, if your team is starting to lose motivation or feels like they're on an assembly line, or if you just get this sense that people are just unhappy, I think that's probably a clear indicator that you are building too fast, they're getting burnt out, and they're losing that excitement because it just, like I said, feels like an assembly line. And finally, I think for your users, you see these symptoms where if you launch your product and you're not seeing very much growth, or you're getting complaints into your customer service email inbox that people don't understand things, these are all big signs that you've probably built too complex of a product to begin with, and you could have mitigated that if you had done prototyping and research prior to that. So you guys can read those ones later, but let's jump into the actual prototyping. So I hope you have this game here, but in Canada when I was a kid, we played this game called Telephone, where all the kids sit in a circle and someone says a funny phrase or something like that, and then they say it to the next person, you see what it comes out with. Do you have something similar? So in my work with consulting with different companies, I always feel like a lot of times they're playing this game of telephone, because when I work with a company, I end up talking to the marketing person or the CTO or their UX team, and inevitably it always ends up that oftentimes they're all speaking slightly different language, and it's clear that they're not communicating. And so I wanted to figure out, how can we put a stop to this? It's a total waste of time, and it really impacts our efficiency on our teams. So too often, the teams, like I said, they're focused on that making, that having something tangible before they go and define the product opportunity and test that and validate the idea. So if you look at the prototyping process, I really break it down into 4 sections, and we're not going to have time to cover all of these today. We're going to focus on the actual creation phase, but I just wanted to lay these out for you. So we've got the research phase, where hopefully you're talking to customers, doing market research, trolling social media, hanging out where your potential customers hang out to get to know them, and hopefully talking to them one-on-one to try and validate your idea with them, or not. Then you need to synthesize all that research, so mapping out the customer's journey, storyboarding it, things like that. Then we get into the actual making of the prototype, and then the actual testing and telling. And I think it's important to just keep this in the back of your mind, because I think a lot of teams just go right to that creation phase, and they open up Sketch and start to debate button colors and things like that. And that's, again, jumping to it too soon. You really want to go through all these steps. Even if you only spend an hour on the first 2, it'll just make sure that you're working much more efficiently when it comes time to actually making the prototype. So we're going to go through those 4 and spend the most time on that creation phase. But like I said, in that research phase, we're really trying to focus on the pain points that people have. So we want to understand, in whatever industry or problem we're trying to solve, what is their problem? How are they solving it right now? What other products are they using to try and solve this problem? And tons of different ways to do that. Like I said, you could be doing one-on-one interviews. I love using research on social media, so looking at what people are tweeting, or going to the Facebook pages of competitor products to see what people are commenting, or reading the reviews of apps in the App Store that might be competitor products, to just get insight into how people are responding positively or negatively. So when I say doing research for prototyping, it doesn't have to be a $10,000 research project with a room and mirrors and eye tracking and all that. It can be as simple as doing some research on Twitter, doing some research on Facebook. If it's a running app or something, go to the local run meetup or something and just observe people running and how do they behave. Join Facebook groups is a really interesting one right now. I didn't realize how popular they are. I'm guessing it's popular over here as well, but I'm noticing that so many groups, whether it's athletic groups or hobby groups, are using Facebook groups as a way to connect. And so if I were, let's say, going to make a running product, one of the first things I would do is embed myself in one of those Facebook groups, because you would just get to see nonstop chatter about what those people are talking about. It's really, really valuable. So don't think that the research has to be a big, expensive project. It could just be as simple as using social media. But, okay, one tip. Don't rely on your friends and family, because they're your friends and family and they're going to lie to you because they love you. So they're going to sugarcoat everything, and you're not going to get that honest feedback. And I have done that before, and I don't recommend it. They're just, even if they are a user, even if it is a running product and they do like to run, it still doesn't count, because they still are your friend or family. So don't just rely on your friends and family. So after you do that research, and like I said, it doesn't have to take 3 weeks, it could take 1 hour, then you need to synthesize that. And by that, I mean we want to map out that journey of the user and that problem that we're trying to solve for them. So we're creating a user flow, we're creating a storyboard, and we're trying to focus on the people and not the screens. So when I do storyboards or user flows, I don't sketch out the actual screens, because the moment I sketch out a screen, next thing you know, you're sketching out the drop-down menu and the search and all of these interface details that just aren't important. So focus on that user journey, and we'll see that in a couple of slides. Okay, another tip. A lot of people say to me, well, I don't like to do this step because sketching out the user flow or customer journey because I'm not good at sketching. And my advice is, this sketch, it's not an art project, it's just a communication tool. So as long as it's going to be something that you talk through with someone else, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a communication tool, that's all. So to give you a couple of examples, this was the storyboard or user flow, whatever you want to call it, for an app that I worked on. It never launched, but it was a product that was going to let parents get reunited if they were at an amusement park or somewhere. Let's stick with amusement park. And if they lost their child, and the caveat was the child was not allowed to wear a tracking device. So when I started to tackle this project, I don't have kids, so I've never experienced this. I did ask some of my friends, but I also reached out to people I didn't know to try and understand if anyone has experienced this. What did they do? And then from there, in that synthesizing phase, I storyboarded this out. And you'll notice that I didn't focus on the details of the screens. So yes, I show when the app might come into play. So this is the first one. We're all happy at the amusement park. Everyone's together. And then all of a sudden, it goes from 2 children to 1 children. The second one's missing. And in this screen here, we're not focusing on all the details of the interface. I'm just capturing the phone comes into play, and somehow we say the kid is missing. So you want to indicate where the product comes into play, but don't get stuck in all the details. So then it walks through all the other steps quickly. We're saying the kid's missing. The alert goes out to everyone else. Then, someone sees the kid and then somehow presses a button that says found. And then over here, this is kind of messy, but it doesn't matter. It's not an art project. This is, let's see here. This is the person that found the kid, and they are maybe FaceTiming with the parents, and then they exchange GPS or something to figure out where to meet in the park. So that's what I mean when I say storyboard customer journey. And as I'm doing that, I also use it as kind of a brainstorm to be able to think of, okay, what other things do we need to think about in the experience? So as a designer, I'm thinking about, okay, they're at the amusement park, it's outside, it's sunny, so we have to make sure that when we get to design, we take into account colors that are going to be good for contrast with the sun. What about battery? What about Wi-Fi? Things like that. So I'm capturing things to consider, potential problem areas in the app, but it allows me to stay at a 30 or 15,000 foot view and keep an eye on the whole experience versus spending 3 hours designing the screen of how someone says the kid is missing, because that's where you just end up wasting time and you focus on the wrong details too soon. So then after I sketch out the storyboard, if you will, then I turn it into more of a user flow with these screens, but you notice we're still not getting into the detail of like, what does this notification say, and what is the text on that button, or what happens on all these. We're just capturing maybe the 10,000 foot view for each screen. And the other important thing with this example is it allows you to focus on the different journeys of all the different people involved. So we're able to, it's a little confusing here, but I was kind of able to parallel, okay, across the top here is what's happening with the parent's experience, the person who loses the kid. And then below is what's happening with everyone else who's visiting the amusement park. And I find that doing this just helps you see the whole experience and not get stuck on one screen or one edge case that may be important, but at launch may not be something that you should let stop you from launching. And in that download link, I have some templates for doing storyboarding and things. So if you want that, that's available. So then once we get to the actual creation phase of the prototype, and I should say, you could still be testing with just those sketches. I've definitely done that before. I don't wait until I have an interactive prototype. I've pulled users in and shown sketches or done a screen share to get feedback, and it's so valuable even at that stage, and it helps you save time once you do get into the detail step here. So we want to be able to create a prototype that we're able to test, but the thing is, when it comes to creating prototypes, you really have to think about what level of fidelity and detail do we need for this prototype right now? And the way that I answer that is, why are we making the prototype? If the prototype is to do usability testing with users, then we might want to add more detail and have real text and real imagery. Or if we're using it to pitch investors, we probably want it to look pretty good and have real text. But if we're using the prototype as a tool to communicate with the team, the developers, UX designers, etc., you probably don't need that level of detail. So I think that's one mistake that I see a lot of teams make, creating prototypes that are too detailed, I think just out of habit. So before you create it, think about what or who is the audience for this, and do we really need the level of detail that you're probably tempted to add, or that someone might be telling you to add over your shoulder. So going back to that example with the amusement park, this is a representation of adding that next level of detail and taking those storyboards and finally going into the details of the interface and really starting to work through, okay, on the screen where we're reporting that the child is missing, we know that we'll have pictures of the kids and the ability to add a new child and the kids' names and things. And then in the next one, after we report the child missing, then for the parent, there's a confirmation screen, and the parent can add additional information of maybe adding photos or saying, we were last at the Harry Potter ride or something, whatever details they may need to add. But this is when I start adding those details. And I think that too many teams just end up going to this stage too fast, and then you lose that high level view, which is so important. So again, I would try to do testing just with this, because it's just another checkpoint for me to be able to learn something and not have features that are confusing or course correct before I get into design or development. Because I always say that, and in every client meeting, I always say, okay, in wireframes, it's going to take maybe 2 hours to make changes. Once we get into design, it's going to be 10x time. Once we get into development, 20x time. And so you want to be able to capture changes when you're working in that lower fidelity so you save that time. And then finally, layering on that higher level of detail, assuming that our audience for the prototype warranted it. So this is for an investor pitch. This is to do usability testing with potential users. I would only add this level of detail if I could kind of justify it to myself and my team. And then I might throw this into InVision or Keynote or whatever tool. I intentionally didn't want to focus on tools this evening just because I don't know how many prototyping tools there are now. There's like a new one every day, it seems. And it doesn't really matter what tool you use. I think it's just a matter of using what you can work the fastest in. I'm so tempted to learn all the new software, but at the end of the day, I know I can work really fast in Sketch and InVision and Keynote, and that's just what I stick to. So do whatever, use the software that works best for you and your team. And then just another example there, but I want to get to, whoops. I want to get to this one, the idea that when you create your prototype, you don't want to reinvent the wheel if there are products or services that can do some of the parts of your product already. So what do I mean by that? I had a client out in San Francisco, and she was creating this product that was going to be for people in corporations who needed to plan events, and they needed to find a space, and they also needed to maybe have someone organize catering and things like that. And so she originally came to me and was in the process of building a very large intake form and this database and a system in order to send people quotes and a payment system. And one of my collaborators and I, we said, stop right now. Don't do this. You need to simulate what your product is going to do with all the other services that are available to you. So we sent her away and told her to go find other products and services to achieve this. So she ended up going off, and instead of probably spending, 6 months or something building this software on her own, she hacked together Instapage for the landing page of this product. Then she used Typeform as a way to get the details from the event planners or HR people at the companies. Then she used Zapier to send it to Google Sheets, I think. And then she would send them quotes over Gmail, send them photos and whatever other details in Dropbox, accepted payment on PayPal, used HelloSign to sign the contracts, etc. You get the point. But if she had gone and tried to build all that on her own, it just would have been, she probably would have had other people come up behind her, and she probably would have burnt out. So doing it this way allowed her to do it much more quickly and be able to not focus on all that software, but really focus on the customer journey. And as a user experience designer, I can say that was probably a horrible user experience for the actual users, because they were having to have multiple logins and things. But for her purposes of trying to validate this idea, if she's doing it like this, hand-holding it with maybe 20 customers or something, it's a great learning for her. And also just to see, will people pay for this service? So as she was going through this, we said to her, here are some questions you need to answer out of this exercise. Is your messaging right? So with the landing page, with Instapage, she was able to just quickly A/B test things and do it on the fly herself, not needing to know how to code. Typeform, or not Typeform, are we collecting enough information with the Typeform and being able to understand what's their budget, how many people, things like that. And she could adjust it, again, on her own without having to go to developers to change the database and all this stuff. What questions do the customers have going through the process? How long is that entire process? What makes a customer buy? So in email, if they're going back and forth, she could kind of figure out the tipping point for the price, etc. So whatever product you're working on, think about, have you maybe started to build too fast? And could you hit pause and use existing services to fill in the gaps for you so you can focus on the experience and not building the software out on your own and paying the price for that too. Finally, once I'm done creating that prototype, then I put it to the test. So like I said, it doesn't have to be some elaborate user research or usability facility and thing. The idea is keep it simple. When possible, I try and do it in person, just because I find that you're able to interact with the person, have those follow-up discussions. Being able to do it real time is just so much more valuable. Also, you're able to read their body language a lot more, I find. If you need to, do it over Skype or user testing or whatever software you want to use. Again, there's so many software available for user testing, so just choose the one that works for you and your budget. It's better to choose one and do testing than not do testing at all. Let's see. Another tip I have for user testing and user research is you always want to record it and just simply just use QuickTime on your computer. You don't have to pay for expensive software. But the reason that I like to record it is because whenever you go back to your team and say, okay, we did testing and this is what we learned, inevitably there will be the people that say, I don't believe you, or that user was a dud, or something like that, right? There's always going to be those people that just dismiss it. And so when I do research, I want to come back with insights from my research, but I record it so that I can have little pieces of evidence, and I almost come like I'm going to a trial or something, and I arm myself with this evidence. And video is one form of evidence for me. Audio is great. If you do have analytics installed, that's helpful as well. Emails from customer service, all those things are examples of evidence. So that's why I say to record it. But the other reason to record it is that if you've ever sat in on a user testing session or usability testing session, you know that there's moments when you say to the person, okay, add an item to your cart and then remove it. And they can't find the remove button, except the remove button is like huge and it's in the middle of the screen, and you just think, why can't you see this? And you want to yell at them. And those are what I call kind of aha moments, where you're just thinking like, okay, this is a problem. And you want to be able to use that video to simulate that for the people who weren't sitting there during the research with you. Some other quick prototyping tips here. Whenever you do prototype, just like when you're creating that product, stick to a feature list for your prototypes, because otherwise you'll spend 3 months making your prototype, and that was a waste of time. So agree upon the features for your prototype and don't let that creep either. Another great tip is to time box your prototyping. So say we're going to build the prototype in a week, a month. Hopefully not a month, but time box it. Otherwise, again, it'll just take way too long. This is a good one. Don't be tempted to add in too much motion or animation. I have had people take the animations in, say, InVision or Keynote literally, and then when it gets to development, it's the one thing that they cannot wrap their head around, and it's what causes them to delay the launch. Especially founders can be kind of picky like that. So be careful with the animation, especially if you're working in mobile. Don't do the prototyping in a silo. So try and involve the developers, involve the content people, involve the marketing teams, so that you're all on that same page, and that while you're prototyping, maybe the marketing team can be in parallel creating the story of how to market the product. And then finally, the storyboard that you hopefully create, if you haven't done one before, I always like to remind people to don't let that just go on a Dropbox somewhere and disappear. You want to keep that within your team and use it kind of like a thesis. So I find that if I can have that storyboard and refer back to it with my team, if we get into what I like to call feature debates, when you're all in a room and everyone's arguing over what feature, if you get into those scenarios, you can always go back to that storyboard, which is really, really people-focused, and say, okay, we're debating this feature. Let's refer back to the storyboard and see if this feature actually solves a problem that existed in that storyboard. So if you think of writing an essay, you don't add sentences that don't support that thesis. So that's how I use the storyboard in the projects that I'm working on, to make sure that we don't build the features that no one needs. That can be for you later. I'll update this, but I like to be really actionable. So these are some things that you guys can do next week with your team. There's 4 things. First of all, set up a time to chat and figure out, are we building too soon? And what could we maybe stop building and just prototype? And then hopefully identify one thing that you can actually prototype in the next week. Then go through that prototyping process. You refer back to the other slide. And then hopefully be able to test that and iterate on it. So like I said, there's tons. Oh, there it is. Like I said, oh my goodness, now it's going to go through. Look at that. I said not to do animation, and here we go. Okay, so like I said, there's that link with all the resources. There's a storyboarding template, a bunch of questions that you could ask during user research, and some other things that I think are going to be pretty helpful. And then if you want more UX resources, I do a newsletter every Friday. I don't do as cool emojis as the family, but we both have pink in our brand, so that's good. Anyway, thank you guys. I'd love to chat if you're around later. And that's all.
Hi, Matteo. I might have missed it because I arrived a bit late. What is the best way for you to source people for the user testing? Because that's always a bit of a pain in the ass to
get
them to show up.
Yeah, so no friends and family in case you missed that part. So some of the places that I've tried that are successful for me, if the product is not launched yet and I don't have an audience, is this on? Yeah. I have used Craigslist really successfully in the past. I tried to use Craigslist in Stockholm last year and it didn't work out so well. So I don't know if that's because Craigslist isn't as popular here, but find the equivalent of your Craigslist and post on there. And what I do is I post in the gigs section and I say, I'm looking for people, and I list out the criteria, men and women between the ages of blah, 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 and all the criteria. And then I tell them I'm doing interviews or testing on this date so I can confirm if they're available. And then I normally link them to a Google form or type form or something where I ask more questions and then I weed them out. And I tell them if I'm going to reward them with a gift card or money or something like that. Also, I've had success with recruiting firms. So traditionally, they're really expensive. I've paid up to $150 American per person. But one that I used really successfully with research in New York City and Stockholm was respondent.io. They're pretty new. I don't know if they started in London, but one of the guys is from London. And they were great, and it was not $150. I don't know what it is now. Other places, I don't know if you were here for this, but think about where the people hang out right now. So social media, groups, even meetups and things like that. Think about where they already exist. Does that help?
Hi,
Hi.
I'm a fellow Canadian.
Oh, good.
Welcome.
I'm from Ottawa.
Toronto.
Okay. I just ran a marathon in Toronto.
Really good for you.
It snowed.
So,
It did.
so I'm a product manager,
Okay.
and as part of my process, I usually go through this process. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where you see the line drawn between the designer / UX guru and the product manager and how that's decided.
In terms of who is executing this or just general roles?
I guess if you were trying to split the roles a little bit, where do you see the advantageous? Is there an overlap or is there clear definition lines?
I think it really depends on the size of the team, and I know that's super ambiguous. I think it depends on the size of the team and the stage of the company, because if you're really small, if you're the product manager and you want to get things done, you probably want to be able to quickly spin up wireframes, do user flows, things like that, maybe even do your own customer interviews. I think the moment that the company starts to kind of get that growth and you need someone to be thinking about not just next week, but next quarter and next year, that's when you need to back off of having your hands in the weeds and really look to the future, but also manage all the other people on your team, the salespeople, the marketing people, the founders who are probably trying to circumvent and go to the designer and say, change this, do this, add this feature, etc. But I think in terms of product management skills, like the more that you can understand the world of UX and be able to get your hands dirty, the better. But don't be tempted to waste your time in that, spend your time in that world if it's distracting you from those big picture things.
Have you had an experience testing in a B2B environment? And if yes, what was like different compared to talking to parents of kids, for example? Or?
B2B, do you mean like a physical space?
Oh
no, yes. So I worked in with a finance company in New York, and I don't really know much about, I didn't know much about finance, I do now, but it was a tool that is kind of like Salesforce for investors to manage their deal flow. So the research was to go to all these investment firms in New York City and talk to partners, talk to the lower people, I forget what they're called, and understand all of their problems, watch them use the system. And the tricky thing sometimes with B2B is that they can be really strict about if you can record the screen, can you take screenshots, can you record the audio? So it makes it really difficult. Or even government products, a lot of times they won't let you access it externally. You need to go to the facility, or you can't take screenshots and video outside of it. So it really tests your skill to remember things and connect everything connect the dots in real time. But that's why I would recommend always do research in pairs if possible. So for those reasons, but also just from my experience, especially if you're doing it in person, if you can have two people, one of them is kind of leading the conversation, the other one is taking notes, reading the body language, making sure it's recording, and then better yet, if it can be a male and a female, just because that has seemed to work the best in all the research I've done and kind of anecdotally with colleagues. But does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In one of your slides, you said that during the customer interviews, look for repeating patterns that occur. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So after I do interviews with people, we spend a ton of time going through that research. And like if you have done, I did 20 interviews last fall, each an hour long. So there was a ton of material to go through. And many people have different ways to do this. The simplest way to do it, I think, is to write everything down. It doesn't have to be on Post-it notes, all in a cool room or anything. Like, do what works for you. Use Post-it notes, use the spreadsheet, put it in Trello, whatever is good for you and your team. And then I look at that all and I start to group it. So if I have comments from 20 people, I arrange everything around checkout, everything around search and filtering of products. And then from there, I go through each of those buckets and I look at the checkout and I start to identify, okay, what was something they didn't work well? What did work well? What was a wish list item from the user? Did they have any other ideas? Did they mention competitor products? And that's how I start to tackle all of the synthesizing of the research. But I would say don't get hung up on where should we put the research? How do we organize it? What color Post-it note does it need to be? It's useless. Just get it down and start to arrange it and think about it.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Generally, how do you prepare for a user interview?
Oh, goodness. Okay, here's what I'll do. I'll add another file to this area because it'll give you a checklist of 65-ish things you could do. You probably won't do all of them. But the way I prepare for it is I guess the best advice is to make sure that when you start out doing the research, you have a solid plan in place. And that plan has to start with your research goals. And those goals need to come not just from your UX team or your tech team. You need to get the founders involved, the marketing involved, all the different departments so that you can all be united in what you want to learn out of these interviews, because it could take a week to do the interviews. It could take a month. So you want to make sure you get the best out of those. And then after at a high level, identify the research goals, then we need to find the people. So come up with the appropriate criteria of who those people are so that you don't get into an interview and you realize this person is totally useless for these interviews. And then you need to plan the interview, so all the logistics and things, and then synthesizing it, and then reporting what you learned. But this checklist will be really valuable for you. Okay.
So you say we shouldn't build products, but at which point do we actually start to build a product? Do you kind of get from prototyping into bigger prototype until you have a product, or you do like a blank sheet?
Yeah, so I would try, let's imagine a scenario where you have not launched your product yet, right? So I would prototype up until the point that you've been able to answer the question, is my intended audience actually willing to sign up for this? So maybe you've just had static screens in InVision or something, and then you've moved over and you have a landing page with Instapage. They didn't pay me to say that, but they're really great to use. But maybe you have your landing page, and then you're starting to see people sign up. And you've also seen that people are willing to give you money. If you can check those two boxes, then I think either start to build or keep going with this kind of hack together system until you have a good quantity of people, whatever that is for you, and then build. But you would be surprised as to how far you can get just by having things kind of magically hooked together in the background versus investing in building your own software. Nothing against building software, but the developers would probably agree, like, you've been in those scenarios where you probably had people tell you to build too soon, and then you spend 70% of your time redoing things because they forgot, oh, we need this thing, and that'll take a day, right? Thank you.
Que la famille